If you've been listening to the Business of Biotech podcast for a while now, you'll recall that Erin Harris has joined me to co-host a few episodes. Erin's my friend, colleague, and chief editor over at cellandgene.com, and she just recently launched a podcast of her own. It's aptly named Cell and Gene, the podcast. And if you're working in the cell and gene space, you should give it a listen. It's a collection of interviews with the industry and academic leaders moving the space forward. And you can find it at cellandgene.com or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Cell and Gene, the podcast. Check it out. Historically, the administration of biologic therapies and vaccines has almost always been a needles and blood proposition for patients and caregivers. But if the uptick in attention I'm getting from biopharma companies developing oral solid dose, dry powder inhalable, and intranasal biologics is any indication, those patients and caregivers might soon see some administration optionality. This is the Business of Biotech. I'm Matt Pillar. And on today's show, we're talking dry powder biologic tech with TFF Pharmaceuticals President, CEO, and Director Glenn Mattes. Now, Glenn has been leading TFF since 2018, but this is far from his first rodeo. During his more than 40 years in the space, he's held president or CEO positions with Therapeutic Therapeutics. Am I saying that right, Glenn? Therapeutic?
Yeah, division of Johnson & Johnson.
Yep, a Johnson & Johnson company, Arno Therapeutics, RMH Sciences, and DEC Therapeutics. Previous to those roles, he was VP and general manager at Rohn Poulenc Rohrer. I could be saying that one wrong as well.
You're good.
And then Centocor. He's been an executive advisor to a host of companies and foundations. He's served on the boards of Advantagene and Viking Scientific, and he's currently chairman of the boards at Translational Sciences and Canometrics. Glenn, I know I didn't catch everything in your CV, but you're among the most experienced, I think, of guests that I've had on the show, and I'm honored to have you.
Thanks. Great to be here, Matt. Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah, you bet. So I want to start at the top. As I noted in my preamble, biologics historically haven't been associated with, they've almost always been associated with parenteral administration. They haven't been associated with any of those other administration forms that I mentioned. So give us the rationale behind TFF's effort to develop inhalable biologic therapies.
Yeah, Matt, so the technology has this, when you look at its ability to get biologics into powders, it's quite unique. And in terms of the larger the molecule, the more complex the molecule, it's where the technology really differentiates itself from other technologies where you can create powders. And the whole approach is really geared towards optimizing the delivery of the therapy or the therapeutic to the lung in a dose that's suitable to optimize the efficacy versus the adverse events potential of the individual compound. So ideally, the target product profiles that we're looking to create are ones where you can achieve optimal blood levels of the therapeutic or the vaccine for that matter, while administering the smallest dose possible to get there. So what we're hoping to achieve is basically one of three things: equal efficacy, a better adverse events profile, perhaps fewer drug-drug interactions, or even better efficacy, which actually falls into sort of this all of the above category.
Yeah.
And when you look at our partnerships, we're partnered with many pharma companies, academic institutions, and the government. The goals of this work is to optimize the formulation to achieve those outcomes. And so our portfolio is quite deep when we look at vaccines, when we look at mRNA, when we look at siRNA, monoclonal antibodies, peptides, phages, you name it. And of course, we can do small molecules as well, as is evidenced by our internal portfolio.
Yeah. I've had a lot of conversations lately with companies who've talked, leaders of companies who have talked about this notion of the democratization of of medicine and biologics in particular, because they're, and there's more to that conversation than expense, right? There's accessibility, there's the patient experience. So what are the implications there around this democratization of biologic vaccines if we can go dry powder inhalable successfully and achieve the efficacy that you reference? What's in it for the patient population?
Yes, I think it's a really good question, Matt. I think the best way to answer it is through example, right? So let's take, for example, a project we're working on with Augmenta Bioworks. We are developing with Augmenta in a co-development relationship, monoclonal antibody. It's right now called Augmenta 3387, real exciting name, right? Augmenta 3387. And it's a antibody that is positioned to treat COVID-19. Now, you might say, well, why is that innovative? Well, what's exciting about that? There are other antibodies currently on the market that can be used, and the Regeneron antibody, for example. Well, number one, and we'll be releasing some data in the coming days or week about just how effective this monoclonal antibody is. So to me, when you start talking about democratization and you start talking about value, you have to look at the intrinsic value that the asset's going to bring to the outcome or the therapy, right? So let's stick on Augmenta 3387 for example. So we're going to try to demonstrate through animal models initially that this antibody is effective to treat COVID-19. Perhaps looking at side-by-side comparisons of what's out there or what's soon to be out there, okay? And then looking at how do you differentiate the administration and where do you create the value ultimately in the treatment cascade and armamentarium for the patient. So we're going to do a thin film freezing version of Augmenta 3387 that will be more for downstream utilization. So that the patient is unfortunately maybe not have that severe disease, or if they have been in the hospital, they've been treated acutely. But with a powdered version, they can go to the doctor's office, get prescribed an inhaled version of Augmenta 3387, and use the antibodies to treat this downstream disease with a powder. So you'll have optimal dose, the best possible matrix of outcomes versus adverse events, and you create value in ease of administration, and you create value in where you enter into the treatment cascade for an individual disease. So yeah, maybe or maybe not, we enter into the more acute stage of treating COVID-19, or you look for where you can differentiate your asset and create optimal value for whatever. And we haven't even gotten to pricing yet, but optimal value for the patient. Does that resonate at all with you?
It does, yeah. I mean, it certainly addresses it certainly addresses that value question. What about when it comes to administration and the patient's experience? I mean, I guess it goes without saying, it's a lead-in question, I suppose. I, for one, and I haven't done any empirical analysis on this, but I, for one, would far prefer to inhale a therapy than to have it injected or administered intravenously. Any thoughts on that? I mean, do you anticipate that part of the market opportunity for TFF revolves around this the democratization of, if you will, of the administration of the therapy?
Well, this isn't the first time we've been looking at administration routes and patient preferences for quite some time. So if you can create the desired outcome, that you get the optimal efficacy versus adverse events profile through inhalation, and that you're not creating any untoward effects around that inhalation, unless the patient has an aversion to inhalation, it shouldn't be an issue. The question really becomes, is there any, for example, right now with our voriconazole product, we've done phase 1 clinical data. We know our dose that we're taking into the pivotal trial, but and we're treating in that case a fungal disease of invasive pulmonary aspergillosis more downstream patients who need more chronic administration of the antifungal because they have cystic fibrosis, HIV, chronic pneumonias. So they're going to need longer administration of voriconazole, where the adverse events profile becomes a consideration. But we're doing a reactive airway disease cohort to be sure in asthmatic patients, there's no diminution of forced expiratory volume or pulmonary function. So going into this trial, with just doing this simple trial, we'll know we can include asthma patients in that pivotal study. We're almost complete with the study, should have results out for the public consumption in early November. That'll support, just another piece of evidence that inhalation of thin film freezing powders is not an issue, okay? And we haven't seen it in any of the trials that we've done. We don't anticipate seeing it. If any irritation, Matt, would probably come not through the technique or the process of inhalation, but if the active component is an irritant. And even in that case, we can do certain things in formulation to soften that irritation. Our TFF chemists are sort of unicorns around applying this technology.
Yeah.
And they have ways to, even if necessary, although we haven't seen it, mask, any irritation that might occur.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to get to, I've got some questions for you around that. The unicorn aspect of those scientists, the development and manufacturability challenge. But before we get there, what about, and this, again, it seems obvious to me, but I want you to dig into it for me. It seems as though if you can take biologics and thin film freeze them, you're going to create inherently some logistics and supply chain advantages. Again, maybe a lead-in question. I could be wrong here, but are there? I mean, is that a correct assumption that if we can eliminate some of the cold chain storage, perhaps, or warehousing or logistics and other distribution challenges that biologics face, that further contributes to the democratization or accessibility of the drugs?
Yeah, so we can talk about manufacturing in a bit, but so yeah, I mean, if there's one, sort of marquee way of answering your question, it certainly does come around thin film freezing's ability to eliminate the need for extreme cold chain storage and distribution. Look, I think all my hats off to how Pfizer and Moderna have been able to manage around this, and the extremes that the distribution networks have gone to make this a non-issue. There's a lot of cost tied up in that. I've seen estimates that better than 50% of the cost of the administration of the vaccine comes from this need to distribute and freeze the vaccine before it's thought out and administered to patients. So clearly, what we have the ability to do is take solution-based vaccine, and the current mRNA vaccines are manufactured and developed with something called an aluminum adjuvant. So all these aluminum adjuvant-based vaccines can be converted to the thin film freezing powder. And in certain cases where we're working with potential partners, the actual powder can become the vaccine, or it can then be reconstituted, simple reconstitution in the field. So it has application in terms of ease of administration, eliminating this need for cold chain distribution and storage, and has tremendous implications for any market where the refrigeration and freezing becomes an issue. So whether it's at the initiation of developing new vaccines, or in potentially the use of thin film freezing in second and third generation currently used vaccines, there's a tremendous opportunity for the application of the technology in this space.
Okay. All right. So I want to give some glory to those unicorns now. As I mentioned, we've just discussed some advantages here. The advantages are obviously potentially game changing, but we have to acknowledge that the reason that we haven't seen dried powder biologic formulations, the reason they're not the standard is because manufacturability certainly has posed some challenges that your unicorns have worked in earnest to overcome. So tell us about that. What are the manufacturing challenges that TFF has had to address to get to the point you're at today? And perhaps what challenges do you anticipate facing as you move toward commercial? And how are you addressing them?
Yeah, so look, developing powders, there are certain other technologies where powders can be developed. Spray drying, spray freeze drying. The limitations there is the depth and breadth of the applications to different molecules. In the case where you have a simple small molecule, perhaps there are other processes can be effective in producing these powders in enough supply to get them downstream to the market is not an issue. In the case of even the small molecule, we certainly believe that the thin film freezing version of these small molecules will even be better in a thin film freezing version. Mm-hmm. But in terms of manufacturing, it's a process that is not extremely difficult. It's not capital intensive. The equipment or the capital expenditures to create, either the freezing part of it or the drying part of it, which is around this frozen roller and lyophilizer, is highly replicable. And it's one of these situations, I guess, if you build it, they will come. You just need a space to install the equipment. If you create the powder, if the powder gets encapsulated for administration through the lung, you encapsulate it and deliver it through an actuator device, which is not costly. If it's given intranasally, same. And now we're even doing solutions back into intraocular or topical administration, like our work with the Department of Defense. So this can be a highly cost-effective manufacturing process. It won't add cost to it. It could even eliminate cost, especially if you eliminate the need for cold chain. Mm-hmm. And we've got our approach is quite strategic and systematic. Right now, if you look at our internal portfolio for voriconazole and tacrolimus and even niclosamide, we work with 3 contract manufacturing organizations that have created GMP materials, which are obviously needed since we're in the clinic. They can scale up. We built redundancy into that. You never know, what could happen. So we clearly are 100% confident that we can create clinical and commercial supplies for those compounds. And then on the biologics side, we've started to do work with Catalent, one of the largest CDMOs on the market, and they're working on the biologics platform, starting with the augmented compounds. Mm-hmm. And we intend to continue to expand the work we're doing with Catalent as we bring more biologics projects forward into preclinical, clinical, and commercial applications.
Yeah. Is there, when it comes to the biologic products, is there any, challenge around the fragility or the maintaining through the process, maintaining the efficacy of the molecule? I mean, stability, maintaining stability. Yeah. Is there any?
No, we actually have, products up on stability. Mm-hmm. And they've been quite durable. Realizing, of course, that some injectables and certain other compounds need to be manufactured in a sterile environment. So the aseptic manufacturing becomes an integral part of what we need to do on the biologics front.
The Business of Biotech is brought to you in partnership with Cytiva. Together, we're committed to helping the leaders of new and emerging biopharma companies navigate the financial, organizational, human resources, and regulatory waters you'll encounter on your way from discovery to the clinic and beyond. Check out a host of useful resources for biotech leaders at Cytiva's Emerging Biotech Accelerator at cytivalifesciences.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA lifesciences.com/emerging biotech.
So I think it's been, we put an article together on the work you guys were doing, I don't know, about a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago. So I think it's been a year since I've talked with you, Glenn. Tell us about what's transpired at TFF since the last time we spoke. What have the last 12 months looked like from development progress standpoint, any clinical advances? Sort of give us an update.
Sure. So, Matt, our business strategy, I guess, is sort of fundamental to understand when I answer that question. So it's a hybrid business approach. So we have these compounds that we're developing internally, voriconazole, tacrolimus, niclosamide, and AUG 3387, and then our partnerships, either with pharma companies, the academic institutions, or the government. So let's talk about internally. If you look back a year, we were first going into the clinic with voriconazole and tacrolimus. We've completed both phase 1 programs successfully. Our pharmacokinetic data, clearly demonstrate the ability to administer the drugs to the lung and get sufficient, significant blood plasma levels. We've selected what doses we're going to take forward into our pivotal first-in-human trials. So that's monumental, right? Also, we've manufactured GMP materials for these trials. So any concerns that anyone might have had around can TFF manufacture goods that can be given to humans? Absolutely. No adverse events reported in those phase 1 trials that will cause for any alarms to go off or any cessation of what we were doing there. Likewise, on the formulation of niclosamide, we have a partnership with Union Therapeutics to take that into a phase 1 trial and bring that downstream to treat as an antiviral COVID-19. And then this sort of breakthrough work we're doing with Augmenta on the biologics front is really remarkable. And the results we're seeing and the ability to begin to look at market differentiation of how we position biologics in the marketplace has been confirmed through that. All the while, on the business development front, we have now, I think the last number, Matt, is about 45 open material transfer agreements. Now, what are material transfer agreements? They're relationships with companies or academic institutions or the government to take their materials and formulate them. Then we do in vitro testing, in vivo testing, stability, et cetera. The goal there is to license our technology and transact with these partners to create economic returns for the company and our investors, bringing these compounds to the market, ultimately by using the company's assets along with our technology.
Yeah.
So we actually now are working with the majority of the top 20 pharma companies on one or more projects. And, it's a process. It takes time to formulate, optimize, get the in vitro work done, do some animal testing, do stability, but these are moving downstream very, very nicely. The company's goal is to do 2 meaningful transactions a year, defined as having some meaningful economics associated with that.
Yeah.
And then all the while we've been working with these partners, we've been building our dossier of data. So we've published the application of the technology to mRNA, siRNA, monoclonal antibodies, phages, peptides, and Dr. Bill Williams is the inventor, and his associates, we now have published quite a bit. We also have expanded our patent platform. We now have over 97 patents either approved or filed for, method of use, process, or composition of matter. As it pertains to individual assets, we more than doubled our patent estate. And then we formed these amazing, I think, hate to use too many hyperbole here, but we have now academic partnerships that we didn't have a year ago. One with Dr. Ted Ross at the University of Georgia. We're working on thin film freezing versions of a new universal flu vaccine. We're working with Dr. Kartik Chandran at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, looking at thin film freezing version of VSV vaccine. We're working with Dr. John Dye. We have a CRADA with the U.S. Army, USAMRIID, Dr. Dai is the founder of the Ebola vaccines, and we're looking at other monoclonal antibody antiviral vaccines, two of them in particular, going into animal trials. We look to hopefully get a second CRADA shortly. And we just started working with, just a couple of months ago, we formed a scientific advisory board, and we were very pleased to announce that we've added Dr. Drew Weissman from the University of Pennsylvania to our scientific advisory board. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Weissman, he is the inventor of the mRNA COVID vaccines at the University of Pennsylvania, and worked closely to bring that to BioNTech and ultimately to Pfizer. Yeah. So we have a number of projects we're working with Dr. Weissman in the mRNA space, both vaccine and therapeutics. So and there's more that I probably am leaving out here, but the constant progress and expansion of the application of the technology has been really remarkable. We're even starting to now dip our toe into gene and cell therapy. We're working with one company in particular in the gene and cell therapy space, building our biologics capability on the manufacturing side through our existing partnerships, and adding Catalent is quite an accomplishment for us as well. And the Department of Defense contract that we have through Leidos as the exclusive formulation partner to develop intraocular and topical countermeasures for use by our warriors in the face of chemical and germ warfare. So it's been quite a year, and it's just the tip. It's just the tip of the iceberg. I really mean that, Matt. It is the tip of the iceberg. I know our investors say, "Well, you got all these open MTAs. When is it going to happen?" It's happening, and if you look at just what's happened on the internal portfolio, remarkable. A lot of near-term catalytic events. We're starting our pivotal phase 2 trials for VORI and TAC in the fourth quarter. So it's been quite a year.
It sure has, yeah. I mean, there's a whole host of questions that arise from the words you just used. It appears as though you must have some unicorns on your business development staff as well.
They do quite a job. The other thing and not to minimize what they do, but even in a year, the tables have turned there where we did a lot of outreach to get our partnerships. Now, I would say at least 3/4 of the business development opportunities, partnering opportunities we have is inbound. Companies that hear about us, see our presentations, see our publications. We have a lot of inbound calls as well, which is fine. It keeps the funnel really, really full.
For sure, to the point where you probably almost have to be selective.
We're trying to get there. There is a bit of selectivity, although we opened up a second feasibility lab at the University of Texas in Austin. So we've doubled our capacity to do this feasibility work. So our turnaround time really hasn't slipped dramatically. It only takes us 2 to 4 weeks to do an initial formulation once we get the partner's materials.
Mm-hmm. What would that look like, that partnership look like moving forward, like for clinical supply, for even commercial supply? And I don't know if, perhaps this question is a TBD on your part, but would you sort of retain that model where you take the asset, you perhaps work with a CDMO like Catalent, and you handle that formulation on your end through clinical and even into commercial? Or does the model eventually shift to the point where your technology is being employed or deployed by the pharma company who's contracted with you?
Yeah, so the strong preference we have is that we retain the manufacturing rights and assign those manufacturing rights to a CDMO. And we work with the partner on getting that formulation done, getting it back to the originator company where they would take it through the clinical and regulatory process. So we build our transactions, with an upfront payment to license the technology, remuneration for key clinical and regulatory events, approval milestones, and ultimately sales milestones and royalties. So we are not in the commercialization business. Even voriconazole and tacrolimus, at the right inflection point, will look to bring on commercial partners to take those forward into the marketplace.
Yeah. Okay. I want to dig in a little bit on your COVID focused product development right now. You mentioned the Augmented deal a few times. You talked about your engagement with the University of Pennsylvania on the mRNA vaccine project. This COVID vaccine and therapeutic landscape is so it changes before our very eyes, right? On the daily. What do you anticipate there in terms of the longer term opportunity around, and you can break this question down however you'd like to, Glenn, in terms of the long term application of your vaccine and therapeutic products in the COVID space. I guess what are you just anticipating in terms of what the market's going to do?
So this is crystal ball time, Matt, right?
Yeah, yeah. I apologize.
And first and foremost, we're not a COVID company. Part of our portfolio is COVID driven.
Sure.
So, the ubiquitous nature of this technology allows us to be extremely opportunistic, right? So there's clearly low hanging fruit. There's low hanging fruit in creating vaccines that don't require cold chain. And, this can have application in second and third generation vaccines in the Western world, the industrialized world. Certainly the application with other companies, smaller companies that are looking to find ways to bring effective vaccine distribution administration to countries that are not where cold chain becomes a problem, and you have to look for more formulations that are easier to get to these remote parts of the world. On the therapeutic side, we're well positioned on the antiviral side of the equation. And again, this thin film freezing, this is probably what's key. The offering of the powder uniquely positions you downstream. So, we could play in the acute setting, but if the vaccines are, and this is clearly crystal ball, right?
Yeah.
Vaccines.
Right. Yeah. Your PR
police
police may interrupt the conversation.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. It's just speculation, and smarter people than me can figure out what the market dynamics ultimately going to be. But you can envision if the vaccines are really effective in creating less severe disease, the downstream model for the antivirals and the antibodies would seem to have a pretty big place in the marketplace. And this is where a powdered version of Augmented 3387 or niclosamide, ease of administration, I think could have a pretty big place in ultimately the treatment cascade. The other thing is, look, we don't know where the variants are headed. I can tell you that Augmented 3387 has been shown effective against the Delta variant. You'll soon see our data on the Lambda variant and the Mu variant. And my part of my background was in working when I worked with J&J. I ran their HIV business, and our assets that we developed in the HIV portfolio was to treat resistant disease, and it did quite well once the HIV virus is a really smart virus, and probably unlike almost any other viral infection, mutated so quickly, and our compounds were able to step in and treat patients who needed to switch to other protease inhibitors and non-nucleosides, et cetera. So, without definitively knowing where this is headed, we're well positioned to participate successfully in the marketplace, whether it's at the acute position or at the chronic position. And hopefully, this is all to help treat the disease better, create value for our investors. But we have so many other shots on goal that we won't, unlike a lot of other companies, we'll be just fine if COVID turns out to and not really fit into the portfolio that's evolving here.
Yeah.
So I'm optimistic, but I want to be, sort of put it in perspective that, I don't spend, every waking hour pondering what happens if the whole landscape for COVID changes for the worse. Certainly I'm concerned, but for the better.
Yeah. Yep.
As long as we can participate.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of that participation, I'm curious, you've mentioned Reconstitution a couple of times, and I know the last time we talked, you went into some detail around that, I guess, functionality. I'm curious, when you say reconstitution, I know we're talking about perhaps reconstituting the biologic back into, an injectable. Is oral solid dose or capsule reconstitution on the radar as well, or is that not an option?
No, it's really back to solution, although we do have some technologies that can work on oral formulations. There's something called hot melt extrusion that we actually have toyed with a bit, but it really depends on what the partner is looking for, again, I don't want to seem, overuse this word ubiquitous, but it is, its application is basically limitless. We haven't come across anything that we couldn't successfully formulate, large or small molecule. We have come into situations where once we formulated the compound and it was tested, it wasn't effective. That's not a factor of our formulation work. It's just that the compound wasn't effective in whatever application in animals that the partner was looking at. Those have been very few and far between as well.
Yeah. Okay. When you look across that portfolio of, some 45 partnership engagements that you're involved in now, and as you said, more coming in all the time, and you look at it from strictly maybe a therapeutic opportunity perspective, what are you most excited about around the opportunity for your technology to have an impact on a particular therapeutic or condition or disease state?
I've been asked that question before. Sometimes I'm asked the question, what opportunity are you most excited about? I love all my children equally.
That's a good political answer.
I do, because look, I can't sit here and predict today, because a lot of these are early stage opportunities that I can't predict where we're going to have the biggest therapeutic impact. I know that there are real large opportunities that can have biologics, again, only the tip of the iceberg in terms of how biologics can be applied to treating plethora of diseases. But the therapeutic indication landscape is really large. This is really, we're working everything from Alzheimer's, to cancer, to infectious disease, peripheral arterial hypertension. It's a long list, and actually sometimes, although I think the partner may know that the partner isn't even really sure how they're going to apply the technology, right? And that may only come to light once you get into animal testing, right? And you see, which of many therapeutic options will be leading there. So, we just want to be the formulation partner to all these opportunities.
Yeah, well, as long as you, I joke that that's a good political answer, that you love all your children equally. But as long as you have the capacity to serve many, why limit it to a few? It makes perfect sense.
I had the pleasure of introducing Colin Powell to an audience of sales representatives when I was at Senecor, and at the time he was being considered for a presidential run or a vice presidential run, and one of the people in the audience said, "Well, if you don't run for president, will you run for vice president?" He says, "I don't answer hypothetical questions." I thought that was the most gracious way of getting out of answering something that he wasn't comfortable answering. So I haven't employed that tactic here, but
I appreciate that you haven't, because it would end the interview quite abruptly and early, I think, if you refuse my hypotheticals.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Speaking of Colin,
it wouldn't be much to talk about.
no. Speaking of Colin Powell, it's a good segue. You had mentioned your engagement with USAMRIID, the United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, to
Good.
address biodefense threats. I'm curious about that. I mean, you mentioned it, and that certainly is exciting and noble work. But how does an engagement like that come to pass?
Yeah. So generally, and we've been put in contact with John Dye or Ted Ross or Karthik Chandran through outreach or that we've initiated. We work with a really strong person on our government relations and academic relations, or inbound. For example, we recently presented to a group called Civics, and Civics is basically the membership in Civics are all of the key vaccine academic researchers in the country. And through that, actually, which was sponsored through, I believe, Ted Ross, we made the relationship with Karthik Chandran at Einstein, Drew Weissman at Penn. So, what we continue to do at USAMRIID, for example, is look for other programs they're working on where the technology can be applied. Or in the case of, UGA or Albert Einstein, we actually go through, and like we did with DARPA, it's actually a bit of a bake-off or a beauty contest. They will position or study in the early stages to how thin film freezing can best apply to their technology. What's the best formulation? And we keep winning these bake-offs. So that's how it happened at USAMRIID. That's what happened with the Department of Defense. That's what's happening in a lot of these different academic institutions, that when you look at the formulation opportunities with thin film freezing, these high-level investigators want to start applying their technologies to this formulation. Maybe not exclusively, they'll play a couple of different hands here, but then ultimately the best of these will be moved forward, and then we'll look for either non-dilutive funding to move them along, or try to partner with a pharmaceutical company to take them into full-blown clinical development.
Yep. Very cool. All right. In the time we have left, just a couple more questions for you, Glenn. Is that okay?
Sure.
A couple
more?
Yeah,
great. I'm enjoying it. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. So, all right. So here's one. You, as I mentioned from the outset of this conversation, your CV, I mean, your career has been, it's been rich, right? Like you've worked on many for some great companies, on many candidates in many disease areas. So in 2018, you had this opportunity to join and lead TFF. What was the inspiration there? I mean, I imagine that at that point in your career, you could pretty much kind of point in any direction you want to go and set yourself off. So what was it about TFF that was appealing to you?
Yeah, so first, the diligence, the people, we go back to this unicorn, right? So I met, the inventor, I met the people that were working on this, clearly top shelf, really understood the technology, had a vision, for how this could be applied. And so that's sort of first and foremost. The funding roadmap was pretty clear. The path to public listing was clear. The support behind the company was remarkable. And you remember, I had sort of evolved into this world of working with biotech companies. Now, Matt, it's a wonderful place to work, but most of these companies, you're working in situations where it's a binary outcome. You've got one or two assets. Your whole future is sort of hanging on the data that's going to come from a phase 1 program or a phase 2 program. And your focus as a CEO in that point is fundraising and recruitment, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's great, but I then looked at the the diversification of the opportunities that we had here, the opportunity to have multiple shots on goal, not be reliant on the outcome of one or two programs, and then just sitting back. And believe me, when I first considered this, nowhere, and even my wildest imagination, I'm a really optimistic guy, could I have seen the path forward here, right? Now, it's not all balloons and seashells, you have to work at it. And that's what really, interested me in coming to TFF. And it's really born, it's really been borne out. And the opportunities to create value for patients and all of the stakeholders, whether it's a patient, who we partner with, the investor, that's really sort of the exciting part about coming to work every day. And every day we're kind of dipping our toe into new uncharted waters. And the one thing that I can always rely on is we know this technology is highly differentiated. We know it works. It has a lot of application. And now it's just about getting these things to the finish line.
Awesome. When you look at the competitive landscape, when I say competitive landscape, I'm looking through the lens of alternative approaches to specifically biologic therapy and vaccine administration. So those alternatives being things like intranasal, dry powder inhaled, oral solid dose capsules. What do you see between now and your finish line? Is that playing field getting more crowded? Is it getting more competitive? Are a few players kind of making all the progress?
Yeah, so as I sit here today, of course, there's competition. I think we talked about that, spray drying, spray freeze drying. We don't see, a threat there. I can tell you, I do see there's an enhanced interest in inhalation medicine. More companies are coming to us, even from channels you wouldn't expect to show an interest in our technology as it applies to inhalation. Do I see anything on the future landscape that I view as a threat? Nothing right now that's on our radar, but clearly our goal is to continue to refine our technology, make it as broadly applicable as possible, and move the ball down the field, in a way that continues to build this dossier of data and patents and application.
Yeah. So you may have already answered this final question I have for you when you listed a very stout to-do list and current engagement list. But if you had to point to the next big thing on your agenda, the next big step for TFF, what would that be?
There are a lot of big steps. I think we have to selectively look at opportunities to build our internal portfolio. And we have to be sure that we get these transactions finished and consummated. It seems they seem obvious, and it seems certain that we will. We were asking people to write a check, and it's just to license the technology, and just with each and every partner, what is that final step to do that? We're at that stage with a number of partners now. We're even optimistic that we'll get 2 meaningful deals done this year, and 2 every year they're forward. So, it's as you get further, as the life cycle moves further downstream, it's crossing that finish line, right? And getting it all done, where it's not theoretical anymore. It's application. The dossier we build are the relationships that we have, the outcomes that we have, the products that we've moved through the development cascade, the partnerships, the relationships with academia and the government. There's just so many boxes, that we just continue to move towards the finish line.
Yeah. Well, I wish you luck with all that. And, like I said, the work is certainly cut out for your biz dev folks as well as your development team.
Yeah.
But thank you for joining us, Glenn.
Matt.
It's Privilege was mine. I really enjoyed talking with you. I hope it's
That's very
not
kind.
another 12 months before we
Yeah,
talk
let's
again.
make sure it's not, okay? Although time goes quickly, right? And so let's check in and just keep looking for those press releases, okay?
I'll keep my eyes
All
peeled.
right.
So that's Glenn Mattes. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva. Please visit cytivalifesciences.com/emerging biotech to explore a trove of custom curated content designed to help guide the emerging biopharma's journey. Then go sign up for my newsletter at bioprocessonline.com. And if you like what you heard here today, hit that subscribe button, give us 5 stars. And as always, thanks for listening.